Before we go to our page 57, just a word of the upcoming parasha. We're going to read two parashiyot. The second one is Bechukotai, which completed the book of Leviticus. And the beginning of Parashat Bechukotai is a famous statement in Rashi, Im Bechukotai telechu, if you follow my covenant, my ordinances. What does that mean? Shetiyu ameilim b'Torah, that you should put your hard labor in the Torah. Meaning, cheilcha leoraita, when a person have a strength, he should put that strength in Torah. Amal Torah, especially we're getting soon to Festival of Shavuot. It's described in chapter 6 in Pirkei Avot, which we always study before Shavuot, is the hard time, hard labor, hard to understand sugya. That's called Amal Torah, the labor of Torah. And we're about to study page 57 in Tractate Yiruvin. It's one of those pages that it's beautiful for those who are familiar with math or familiar with a measurement, those who are engineers in their respected field. They'll enjoy most probably this page, but others should remember that that's called Amal Torah, a special blessing God gave us in this parasha, the second part, the Bechukotai, for those of us who put our arduous effort in understanding Torah. With that in mind, we are on page 57, middle of the page at the Mishnah. Notnin karpaf la'ir, divrei Rabbi Meir. Karpaf, to refresh our memories. We have the 2,000 amma measurement outside of the city limits, but then we have an addition, especially in those days. You see it also in our times when you measure cities, but in those days it was 2,000 amma, and in extension it was shiv'im amma v'shiraim, 70 cubit and some addition. Why is that? Because it was different needs that they use. People in a city, can be private, can be municipalities need, that he uses as some type of outside property, but it's still part of the city, involved, for example, of karpaf. Karpaf, it's like a spot that it's have a partition all around the karpaf, and they use it to put otsar, for example. If you are a farmer, you put there a stack of grain. If different needs for people that they need to have some type of storage spot, they put it there. Now, the condition of the karpaf, it has to have mechitzot, mukaf mechitzot, that you have a partition around the karpaf, and you put it outside of the ear. So, Rabbi Meir said, when you measure property of the city, you cannot start just from the last house of the city. You have to go a little more, which is 70 plus 2/3 cubit, and from there you can measure. And again, it's because of all those extensions that you have outside of the regular inhabitants of the property's domain of the city. V'chachamim omrim, the sages disagree, and they said, Lo amru karpaf, ela ben shtei ayarot. So if you have two towns, here you see it a lot. Trace a town like Bowie and Crofton, or a Edgewater and Riva. So you have several towns that are very close to each other. So the sages said you can go by measurement of karpaf, which again, based on what we said in page 55, it's the outside of the city, the inhabited part, that involve with a spot with partition and used for storage, that can be used if that karpaf located between the two towns. אם יש לזו 70 אמה ושיריים ולזו 70 אמה ושיריים, עושה karpaf את שניהם להיות אחד. So remember when we talk about the measurement of 141, you remember so if you have two cities and you measure from each side 72/3, you remember the picture I showed you from Morot? Let me find it, give me a second. So if you have it between the two domains, so you can put the 70.23 between the two properties, and oh, here is it. 199. Do you see? Everyone see it? Okay.
Yes.
This is one city, and this is the other city. This is the 141 and the third. So they said you take 70.23 in one side, 70.23 in the other side. Here you put the karpaf. Here is the karpaf in between, and in order to communicate between the two cities, you can go ahead and do that. Okay? Said, but you do not reduce from the 2,000 amot, not anything from the second town, and not the karpaf that you have in between. In other words, this is an addition. You use the karpaf as an addition to 723 in each side, and then you use the karpaf in between. The same apply. וכן שלושה כפרים המשולשים. If you have 3 farms, 3 villages, that for the sake of understanding, it's not necessarily triangle, but imagine that it's in a triangle fashion. Later the Gemara explain if it's really triangle or it's go in a straight line. So אם יש בין שניים חיצונים 141 ושליש, if you have in the external part 100, only 141 1/3 cubit separating between the two outer villages, עשה אמצעי את שלושתם להיות אחד. So the middle village combines the 3 villages into one. So with that we go to the sources. So the Gemara said, how do you know that beside of, you remember that we bring sources for the 2,000 amah, but how do you know that in addition to 2,000 amah you can use a karpaf? מנענה Amarava da'amar kra mikir ha'ir v'chutza. So the Torah speaks about the measurement of the city of the Levites. And you remember what we said yesterday? That we juxtapose, we compare, we learn from the city of Levi to the whole idea of Tchum Shabbat, the Shabbat measurement. So he said, because the Torah said in regard to the Levites, the cities, that it's 2,000 tamah, that it's put outside of those cities. Why they did it? To beautify those cities, or to have a vineyard, different beautification. You see nowadays in the modern cities, I saw it not long ago in the Netherlands. In Netherlands they have a special beautifications area that they put a circle around the city with trees, with flowers, of all kind of things. So they do it for beauty. So the Torah said in Bamidbar, in Book of Numbers, chapter 35, Mikir ha'ir v'chutza, in the open space of the cities. I'm just quoting the translation for that part in the Torah. And the open space of the cities that you shall give to the Levites shall be from the wall of the city and outward a 1,000 cubits around, and you shall measure from outside the city in the east side 2,000 cubits. So you see here, what's the apply? That you can put outside of the property of the city, which is the karpaf. What is the karpaf? In the measurement, the empty spot that they have the measurement of 70.23 cubit, ואחר כך מדוד. So a certain, you provide a certain vacant space outside of the city, and only afterward you measure 2,000 cubits. So Rabbi Meir in a Mishnah, that he hold that we have to add this karpaf because of this line that's written in the Levi's. He said that that's for sure applied to the Levi's cities, but in addition you don't add more 70.23 in addition, because that basically ruin all the previous discussion we have in the Gemara. So he said that this Braita, this statement, it has to be in conjunction to the sages, the Chachamim, but not go by the Rabbi Meir. So because the Chachamim said when you use the word mikir ha'ir v'chutza, from the wall of the city and outward, that specifically means that you can measure from any place. So it means that sometimes you can put karpaf and sometimes not, but the sentence want to tell us that you can measure in two different limits of the property. So in a single city that they have, for example, city walls, or at the end, the last property, last home of the city, so you can measure without putting a karpaf. But if you have two cities that close to each other, you can add the word chutza, which means chutza is the karpaf. That's basically the Rashba explanation of this idea. So it's go along very much with Chachamim. Then we said in the Mishnah, והחכמים אומרים, לא אמרו karpaf אלא בין שתי עיירות. They spoke of the addition of karpaf only when you have this space between those two cities. Itmar, Rav Huna Amar. Rav Huna said, according to the sages, that you have two villages close to each other, notnin karpaf lazo vekarpaf lazo. So here, what we do, we allocate a karpaf to this city and a karpaf to that city. So, if the distance between the two properties, the two cities, is not exceeded than 141 1/3 cubit, we consider that as one city. Chia barav amar, what the sages meant is karpaf echad lishteihem. You go by the property of size of half of that, which is 70.23 cubit, and that apply to both cities. So only a half measurement of the previous one, which is Rav Huna, that's what's involved, what's need between the two properties. In other words, only if the distance between them not exceeded 70.23, you can combine them both to make it as one. Now we want to prove the point of Chia barav. תנן וחכמים אומרים, לא אמרו karpaf אלא בין שתי עיירות, which means you can have one karpaf to two cities. So what happened here? One karpaf apply what? Only if it's a 70.23. Tiuta de Rav Huna. Why? Because what did Rav Huna said? You need to have two karpifot. Amar lach Rav Huna, my karpaf. What did the sages meant when they use the term karpaf? You remember what is karpaf? You remember 55? It's a property that have a partition around, and it's a storage, and it's outside of the city domain. So he said that's applied to what? Torat karpaf. That we have the regulation of karpaf, but they don't talk about the karpaf itself. So it's nothing to do with the measurement of the property that you give for the karpaf. Uleolam karpaf lazo vekarpaf lazo. And it means the principle of karpaf, in actuality, one allocates a karpaf to this city and karpaf to the other city. Hachaname mistabra, that's the way you can understand midektane seifa, from the second, the last clause of the Mishnah, that said, Im yesh lazo shiv'im ama veshiraim, if one property measurement is 70.23 in one side, velazo shiv'im ama veshiraim, and the other have the same, oseh karpaf lishneihem liyot echad. So he can use, if is a space between the two of 2 karpifot. 2 karpifot is what? 70.23 twice, which is 141 1/3 cubit. Then it's considered as one city. Shma mina, here you have a proof that you have a karpaf to each city. So again, 2 cities that they are close to each other, that the measurement between the 2 properties not exceeded 141 1/3 cubit, it's considering as one city. So now by saying so, we are basically making a proof against the point of view of Chiya Barav. So the Gemara asks, Leima tehevet yuvta de Chiya Barav. If you tell me that this is a proof for the last clause of the Mishnah, it's opposite of what Chiya Barav said, that he said what? Only one karpav between 2 domains. So they said, no, that's not the proof. Amar la Chiya Barav responded, he said, 57b, Hamani Rabbi Meir. This is the second clause applied to Rabbi Meir. So it's not completion of the word of the sages, but usually we follow the rules that Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. If you have a Mishnah without name and you have an opinion, it's usually go by Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir hold that you put a karpaf in a city, and the sages said only if you have 2 cities, then you put karpaf for both. Another thing Rabbi Meir said, that between 2 cities you put 2 karpifot, which means that each of them has independent karpaf, and they make it both to be one. So he said, I Rabbi Meiri, if the last clause of the statement is go by Rabbi Meir, Hatanele Reisha, he is already said in the first part of the Mishnah. And we said clearly Rabbi Meir. And what did he say? Notnim karpav le'ir divrei Rabbi Meir. He said clearly that you put a karpaf in a city, the word of Rabbi Meir. So meaning, because you put a karpaf to one city, it's obvious that you derive from that you put 2 karpifot to 2 cities. So why he needs to repeat himself again at the last clause of the Mishnah? The Gemara responded and said, Tzricha. You need to use the halachot of karpaf in both cases. The imeahi, if we learn the practical halacha from the first part of the Mishnah, that Rabbi Meir said. What did he say? That you need to put one karpaf to one city, and you derive from that also to the second clause of the last clause of the Mishnah. You can do that. Why? Hava mina, that can mislead you to think chad lechada vechad letarte, that you put one karpav to one city, single city, but you put one karpav between two cities that close to each other. So since you may say that the karpaf is not part of the city, only as addition that you add to the property of the city, so therefore karpaf cannot combine two independent cities to each other to make it one domain, only if it's attached to the city itself. But if you take one karpaf from one city and you put it for the second one, it cannot combine the two cities. He said, Kamash Melan. So it's come and teach us, Deletarte trei yahavinu lo. So it means the last clause of the Mishnah that said that you can put two karpifot in order to combine them, and if it's not a distance more than 141 and 1/3 cubit, so it's considering as one city. Ve'i ashmi'inan hacha. If Rabbi Meir tells us that that two karpifot combine each two cities to make them one domain, I may say that applies specifically to two cities that close to each other. You see one city to the other. So therefore, one family, they have their cousin or the children, the other domain. So you can make this karpifot as part of the city domain, and people can go and from one domain to another to visit each other, etc. on Shabbat. Why? Mishum dedchikat ashmishtayu. Because usually you don't use that domain in between them. Because why? What happened to that domain outside of the city? If you don't spend great amount of money to build that place, to make it fruitful and multiply, make it beauty, it's usually a shetach bur, is the area of dead property. You don't use it for anything, is just staying outside of the domain. Now, if you have a building or something to beautify the city outside of the city, it's beautify the entrance. You see in many cities you have sometimes even a mile or two of beautification around the city while you're driving toward the city or you're going around the city. You see those beautiful places. But here, in order to beautify two cities, you need to have the two karpifot in between. So meaning, if you have two cities, city A and city B, and between them it's a empty lot, that it's a only size of two karpifot and not more, you cannot consider that spot as a place for beautification of the city, because you combined it as one city, since that empty space used for outer circle of the city, and many cases they don't use it to any beautification. Just for the sake of understanding, imagine the small part between Bowie and Crofton. So you have the two small towns, relatively small town, and you have in between them a domain of unoccupied land, but they don't do anything on that land. It's just empty land. Aval hatam delot dechikat ashmishtayu. But in the case of single city, that you don't use it for a specific need, because is no other city that limit that spot. Malo, you may say that we don't consider that karpaf as part of the city tzricha. So Rabbi Meir tells us, yes, you have to put 2 karpifot in 2 situations. Now, we go by this last clause of the Mishnah that said as follows: וכן 3 כפרים המשולשים. Remember we said that if you have 3 villages that is in a triangle. So you see here in Maorot, picture number 211. Everyone see it? Okay. In this case, you talk about 3 domains that they put it in a way of equal square of 3 domains. So they said, אם יש בין שניים החיצונים 141 אמה ושליש, עושה אמצעי את שלושתם להיות אחד. Beautiful. If you have a spot, you take here and you take here, and it's all together 141 and third. Meaning what? That you have each spot
is 2 karpiot.
Yeah, so each spot, let's say it's 70 and something, okay? And you combine these 2 spots in between, it's 141. So that make the middle one cause these 2 to consider 1. Okay? Tama deika emtsai. The reason that you consider all 3 as 1, it's because you have a middle occupied property, which means that that this village in between split the spot in between them, the space in between them, which is each one not exceeded more than 70 and some and 2/3. So it's like combined with that karpaf. Haleka emtsai. But if you do not have something in between, what do you understand from the last clause of the Mishnah? That the idea that you have 141 and 1/3 will not help them to make it 1 village. In other words, if that was a missing and the distance is the same distance between the 2, according to that part, it doesn't help them to make it 1. Oh, if that's the case, Tiyuvta de Ravuna. That's totally opposed to what Ravuna said. What did he say? He said that according to the sages, 2 cities that they have a distance of 141 and third, it's considering 1. So in other words, by Chia Barav, it's fine. So the Gemara said, Amar lach Ravuna, ha'it marala. Let me prove my point. Amar Rav Idi, Amar Rabbi Chanina, לא משולשים ממש, אלא רואים כל שאילו מטיל אמצעי ביניהם ויהיו משולשים, ובין זה לזה אלא 140 ואמר ושליש, הוצא אמצעי 3 להיות אחד. Beautiful. So he said, look, you see here, what they're speaking about here is in between them. That's the way. It basically, the appearance is more like meshulash in Hebrew, triangle. So you have each one of this distance is less than 141 and third. So it means as long as the distance between the 2 towns, the outer towns, smaller, that if you, how do you say it? Figuratively, right? Figuratively. Imagine that I take this and push it in between. If I do that, even now in reality it locates like that. But if you push this and make it in between them, so it will not, the distance between the 2 will not exceed 141 and 1/3. So you consider that like you put them together and it makes the whole three to be one. So just it's an addition to that. Rashi here explain, and I explained in my book Biurei Klomar Berashi al Hashas, that Rashi here explain why the Gemara used this triangle point of like moving the third city on the back, because what's the real difference, Rashi asked, between making it a triangle or physically they are staying in line? So he said that if you make it in a triangle, the three properties and one in between on the bottom, and is basically explain to you the size of measurement, which means they want to prove the point that the location, the physical location of the middle property, regardless if it's a physically between them or in distance between them, as long as the measurement side between each of them, it's no longer not exceeded in together with 141 and 1/3 is fine. The Rambam.
So you're only measuring in one direction. You're not
one direction.
So if you're measuring east-west, then it doesn't matter how far north or south it might be.
Correct. The Rambam said in Ilchot Shabbat, in chapter 28, Halacha Hey, and that's the Raivad and others, that the distance has to be below than that. The Ran and the Rashba.
They're saying the actual distance.
The actual distance.
So that means that if they're a triangle, you'd measure directly from the one to the middle one, and
directly
then directly from the middle one
to
to the other one, and
yes.
they have to be within.
Yes, yes. I elaborate in my book, not now, but maybe another time. But anyway, so by using the term in the Gemara, lo meshulashim mamash, not real triangle, it brings us to the point that it's a figurative measure. So this way he can explain the whole concept of the distance between the two domains. Amar le Rava le Abaye, Rava said to Abaye, Kama yehe ben chitzon le'emtzai. What's the distance between each one of this outer property to the middle property, that we say that it's like you're pushing this one in between them? Amar le alpay mama. The measurement has to be 2,000 cubits, which means...
Now, are they saying 2,000 cubits in the, say, north-south direction, or are you talking just directly between them?
So
you measure directly between them with 2,000 or more.
So for the idea is only if you put it directly of 2,000 or more.
Okay, so it's not that it's shifted down 2,000 or more. It's
no.
that it's. I got you. Okay.
So in other words, if the measure of the middle one, it's for example 100 cubit. So the 3 consider as 1. If it's not exceeded more than 382 and the something,
sure.
2/3.
Sure.
So then if you put it in between them, you reduce the distance between the three in a 282, which means that it's 141 and 1/3 to each one, because the measurement is 141 and 1/3 plus 100 plus 141 and 1/3, which is 382 and 2/3. So it's, you look at this part, it's like combining with the other two, and it's all it's one village. So therefore, if a person stay in the property, let's call it this property A, and B and C. So he's in property A, and he went toward B, and then he go to C. So the distance between A and B it's up to 141 and third, and therefore it's, in that sense, it's not considering as one domain. Now, he said here, "V'ha'at hu de'amar." Rava asked for that limitation. He said, here we're talking about this one, but if you go further, and we said that you remember in the 55b we talk about city that made out of keshet, out of a triangle. So we said, wait, let me find it. So it said here, yeah, this is one example. This is like keshet, like rainbow, okay? And what we explained, that all this area is occupied, and between this and that, we have 2,000 cubits. So he said, "V'ha'at hu de'amar." You are who said, "Kvatei derava brei derabah baravuna mistabra." De'amar yoter me'2,000 amah. So if it's exceeded more than 2,000 amah, so we said that we hold that it's like one property. So we consider all this domain like it's filled of houses and yards. So even that this distance exceeded the 2,000 amah. So why we say that if you have 3 villages, that you have to have no more than 2,000 cubits in order for them to consider as one. So Abaye said, "Hache ashta." How you can compare the two? Hacha ika batim, hacha leka batim. Here, you see what happened? It's all occupied with houses.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go from here. Let's go to the extreme. From here to here, no problem. Why? Because it's fully occupied with houses. Hacha leka batim. But what happened here is no houses in between.
Mm-hmm.
So you cannot compare it. It's two different things. So therefore I objected that, and I said that this one cannot move and combine the two, even not figuratively. Why? Because it's empty spot in between. ואמר לי רבא לאביי כמה יהיה בין חיצון לחיצון. So okay, I understand what you're saying, but what's the distance needed between each outer property in order to consider this one as part of the 3? What's the measurement of a distance? Has to be. He says, Kama Yeheh. Abaye asked him, what do you mean by Kama Yeheh? What's the measurement? What's the difference for you, the space in between them? What we said earlier, that as long as you can push these, boom, to be in between them, and the distance altogether not exceeded than 141 and 1/3, that's it. So it's considering this one. So what's the real reason for you to know in reality the difference between the outer and this one? Why you need to measure that? As long as you have this distance, it's fine. He says, "Va'afilu 4,000 amah." So he says, oh, even it's a 4,000 cubits, which like a lot. Amar le ein. He said, yes. So for example, if this one, the middle one, it's a 3,800 cubits, and the distance between the two, it's 4,000 cubits.
Mm-hmm.
So we considering as this one filled up 3,800, and then you have less than 141 and third between them, and it's fine. So Rabbi asking, he said, "V'amar Ravuna, ir asuya kekeshet." If you have a city that made out of keshet, this is again 55a, picture 198. If you have city that it looks like keshet, like rainbow, and you have less than 4,000 cubit in the empty spot from one corner to another. Okay? He said, מודדים לה מן היתר, ואם לאו, מודדים לה מן הקשת. Which means you can measure from this corner to that corner. And he said, otherwise, you measure from that rainbow. So, why the two legs of the keshet, of the rainbow, has to be between the 4,000 cubits? And the other example of the three villages, here in picture 212, you don't require those limitation of the distance. He said, Amar le, Abaye responds, and he said, Hatam leika lemei marmale. Over there in a city that made out of keshet, of a rainbow, the combination will not change the Shabbat limitations, because it's all connected, right? And you don't fill up that spot. It's considering by itself, it's like filled up. So therefore you need to have the distance between the two corners up to 4,000 cubits in order to combine all as one domain. And here, hacha ika lemei marmale. Here you talk about totally three different villages, three different towns. So therefore, you can consider the spot in between those cities, because it is happening that people combine the three together. So you can say that the three properties, considering as one domain, even their distance 4,000 cubit or more, because one is not muvla, is not combined with the other. So just as a side note, it reminds me when I study it, my late father-in-law, may rest in peace, Rav Yitzchak Meir Hayatan Heitner, was the first Rav Arashi, the first chief rabbi of Shomron. So in those years, at the 80s, they started building settlements there. So it was one family, I'm talking at the 80s, one family by the name of Zar, Moshe Zar, family by the name Zar. They built on the top of one of those hills, purposely a large home. And then they built in a distance, in one of those valleys, which was some distance, more than kilometer. They built houses, and then they went to another hill and another valley and built another one. And the goal was, in those years, at the mid-80s, is that eventually people occupy the spot between those other two properties, and they make it a large city. Unfortunately, in that particular case, what happened, the government get in between, and they limited, they circumscribed the size of the domain of those people, settlers that came in that place. It's called Karnei Shomron, that's the name of that settlement. And to this very day, it's still a distance between Karnei Shomron and the Zar family. So I remember those years when the Zar family wants to daven, they have issue, they either need to come before Shabbat, they have an issue to walk from their hill to the, if I'm not mistaken, over the years they start arranging minyan and shul in their own domain. But the goal originally, and it was in many settlements successful, but not in this case, that they try to build a city by putting different people in different hills, with the hope that later you can combine all of them and make it one. In another settlement, it's called Kdumim, it's going further in Shomron, that settlement they are successful, which is, it was three hills, far distance in those days from each other. We're talking a few kilometers between the two, or three. and they build houses, few houses, like several families in each domain, and then surely and slowly they start occupying people in between, which reach the goal that eventually they are all connected as one quote-unquote large city. So you see that it's not unprecedented, the idea of having three small towns that eventually they combine either physically or figuratively. They can be combined. Back to our subject. So since we talk about halacha that we said in a Mishnah, when you have two villages, it's considering as one only if the distance between them not exceeded 141 1/3, or according to other opinion, it's 17 2/3. So, Amar le Rav Safra le Rava, Harei bnei Aki Stefon. There is a city named Aki Stefon. The Mashchinan lu Tchuma me'agisa de Ardashir. That we take another village called Ardashir, and they take part of that domain. Uvnei ad de Adrashir, Mashchinan lu Tchuma me'agisa de Aki Stefon. So, which means that we take those two properties, two cities, and we combine them. Ha'ika diglat de mafseka yeter mi-141 v'shlish. But they have exactly situation of another, most probably it's small towns in Babylon. It's called Diglat, that they have the Hidekel river in between, that river distanced them more than 141 1/3. So for our understanding, imagine a river and Edgewater. You have a small river, small for our purpose, it's not an ocean, it's not heavy part of the bay. But yet you have between, correct me David, right, between Edgewater and river, right,
South
Gil?
River.
What is called South River?
River.
South River, thank you. So you have a distance that that exceeded more than 141 1/3 cubit. So why you don't consider those two cities as one village, and each one of those cities you measure only from the end of their property's domain? So Rava responds and he said, Nafak achavele. So Rava took Rav Safra with him, and he showed him Hanach at Mahata de Shura. He showed him, it was unfortunately some cities, if you read also in the Tanakh you see it, that some city demolished. Some cities were one domain and then they built another one, but it was some churvot, some you see it like for example in Jericho. It was a wall, it's collapsed. So when you go and visit, you see that it was houses that no longer in use around the city. So all those churvot, demolished properties, it's in our language swallowed by the Hidekel river within the 70 2/3 of both cities. So even they are close to each other within the 70 2/3, it's the foundation that go from one domain to another, and therefore they combine the two to make it one. Now we go to the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah tells us how you measure the 2,000 cubits outside of the city domain. En modedin ela bechevel shel 50 ama, lo pachot velo yoter. The only way you measure the Shabbat limits is you take a rope of 50 cubits long, no less and no more, and the Gemara explained why. Velo imdod ela keneged libo, and you measure only whatever come to measure the limits that hold the rope next to his chest, which means that you can hold it straight. They measure the heart just in order to hold the rope properly, because if you put it in the neck or the legs, Rashi said, the rope will not be straight. היה מודד והגיע לגיא, when you measure and all of a sudden you see valley, or לגדר, or if you have a fence, so you see here, picture 213, you want to measure the city. You go outside of the domain and you have 50. And now you have this valley. So you basically combined it. Mavli'o. So you combine it with that. And then he said, חוזר וחוזר למידתו. Okay. You see this city. You go here, and this is 50 cubits. And you have this valley that exceeded 50 cubits. So you measure it, and the Choser Lemidato, you go back to the original. So Rashi said that if this distance was exceeded more than 50, and you cannot use the robe, because look what happened here. So he basically stopped here, and that's the way he measured it back. So it's like return, because he cannot. This part is like exceeded 50 cubits. So in a way, he's stuck. So he said. The Gemara later will explain that it applies specifically if it was really a spot that you stop measuring because of the circumstance. Higia lahar, if you reach a mountain, mavli'o vechozer lemidato. If you reach a hill, he does not measure its height, rather he spans the hill as it was were not there, and then he resume his measurement. So in other words, it's like, literally, it's like not existed in order for him to measure. 58, ובלבד שלא יצא חוץ לתחום. The only allowance we have for that person who measure, it's provided that he does not thereby go out beyond the Shabbat limits, the city Shabbat limit. Okay, so basically you have the guy who made the survey, and you have the other, the supervisor, watch him. So he said the watching, the survey might mistakenly think that the limits extended to that point. So he said, "Im eno yachol leavli'o." Let's say if it's exceeded more than 50 cubits. So how will be able to combine it? So they said, "Bazo amar Rabbi Dostai bar Yanai mishum Rab Meir shamati shemekadrim be'arim." So basically, according to the view of Tosfot, there are few issues here. Imagine the story of Egla Arufa. Remember in the Torah they said that if somebody is a dead body between the two cities, and we need to measure the closest city, so or the city of rescue. So that's a different story. You need to have a clear measurement without airspace that you combine within your measurement. But if it's not applied to those cases, you can basically go here, and he said, you take a rope of 4 cubits, and the last one, put it in a heart, and the top one, put it in his leg. You see here, this is in his heart, go lower, lower, and here is in his leg. And that's connected to the city. So in that sense, each rope is 4 cubits between them, and that's the way you can measure the distance between them. So in that sense, the rope is straight, because you see it's going down, and it changed the status from the heart to the leg. So the Gemara asks, Menan Emile, from where you learn this din? So Gaon Yaakov said that it's not a clear point, that all idea of using 50 cubits is only rabbinic. Is just want to bring some thought from the Torah indirectly. It's called a smachta, something that support that point. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, the Amar Kra, they said about the courtyard of the tabernacle in the book of Shmot, chapter 27, Orech echatzer me'a ba'ama, verochav 50 ו-50. He said that the length of the courtyard shall be 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 by 50. Amra Torah bechevel shel 50 medot. So it means that Torah said, measure with the rope that 50 cubit, which means the length and the breadth of the courtyard must be measured by 50, with the rope of 50 cubits long. So they said, Hami bayale litol 50 ulesavev 50. So take a square of 50 cubits by 50 cubits and surround it with 50 cubits. So it's all 72/3 and 72/3, and you derive from that the measurement of karpaf. Said in Ken, Leima kra 50-50, my 50 ב-50. So the Torah said 50 by 50. What's the idea of 50 by 50? Shmat mina tarte. You learn two halachot. The measurement of karpaf, it's a square of 72/3 and 72/3, and also you can use a rope that have a measurement of 50 cubits. The first halacha is Rema, Rabbi Moshe Isserlich on Shulchan Aruch, Or HaChaim 398. The Shabbat limit of 2,000 cubits is calculated from the last residential house of the city, and that's the sage's opinion, but however, some hold that is an additional 70 cubits are added. That's the lenient opinion of Rabbi Meir, and that's the Rema, and the halacha generally follow the lenient opinion with regard to halachot of Eruv. So if the two cities are situated near each other, the karpaf is allocated to each for a total of 141 and 1/3 cubit, and that's basically the idea of Rav Huna. And also they said that he was the older one. Shulchan Aruch Harav said, Shlosha kfarim, if there are 3 villages positioned in a triangle with no more than 2,000 cubits between outer ones and the middle one, and it's possible to insert the middle one in between the 2 outer villages, so there is less than 141 and 1/3 cubit between them, they all assume the legal status of a single city, and therefore the Shabbat limit for each is measured from the outskirt common to all the villages. Again, the Rama hold this leniency apply only if the 2 outer one allow their inhabitants to walk from one to another. However, the middle village continue to measure its own boundary. Others maintain that the residents in the middle village are not confined to the Shabbat limit as measured from its own village. The last halacha of today is the Shulchan Aruch Or HaChaim 399. Whoever measures the Shabbat limit must hold the rope as taut as possible at the level of his heart. So in that sense, when you have several people that hold it, it will be considering as a straight line.